That means that I cover all sorts of different things that are happening in the Tennessee Valley. One of the biggest stories we've had so far has been that massive gas pipeline leak. Gas prices to skyrocket comparatively here in the Tennessee Valley, causing very big problems for us as a community as a whole. It's been a tragedy in terms of our wallets because most of us, maybe I won't say most of us, but a lot of us who live here aren't exactly millionaires. You know, we can all kind of agree about that. I'm not a millionaire. You're probably not a millionaire. In fact, most of us probably don't make over 100K. You know, most of us are probably in the 40 to 50, you know, in between 30 and $80,000 is probably a good estimate for the average person. And of course, there are a lot of people who are more than that or less than that, and that's fine. Well, maybe less than that's fine, but most of us can't afford to spend that extra amount on gas. We've already budgeted for gas going on the average gas price. We can't afford more. And it's crazy to me that suddenly, you know, we got to pay all this money. And it's not really anyone's fault, I suppose. These things happen, but it's still a rather shocking thing to have happen. It's scary. Well, Snowden's been thrown under the bus by the Washington Post. And I want to talk about that because that is one of the biggest news items I think that's happened in the last maybe month or so. The reason being, it's it's not being very well talked about, for one, and it's also not being covered nearly as much as it should be by other news organizations, especially when you have a chance to bash the opposition. I don't know why they don't do it. Now, at Hot News Talk Radio, we're not really in competition with any newspaper. Radio newspaper don't really compete that much, even for advertisements. So it's not like we're going up against the New York Times or anything here. But something that's interesting is this whole Washington Post debacle, where the Washington Post, which is the newspaper which published Edward Snowden's leaks about the NSA, has now decided for some odd reason to throw Edward Snowden under the bus and say he shouldn't be pardoned. And in fact, he might possibly should be executed. And that's a real comment from the Washington Post. Maybe it's an editorial, you know, but here's from The Intercept. Glenn Greenwald, who's known to be a bit of a friend of Snowden. We're not just going to focus on The Intercept's article. There's also an RT article and a New York Times article to talk about as well. But 3 of the 4 media outlets which received and published large numbers of secret NSA documents provided by Edward Snowden, The Guardian, New York Times, and The Intercept, which is what we're reading from here, have called for the U.S. government to allow the NSA whistleblower to return to the U.S. with no charges. That's the normal course for a news organization, which owes its sources duties of protection. And something to point out here, too, the Washington Post got a Pulitzer Prize for the articles that were written about Snowden. That's kind of a big deal. A Pulitzer Prize is not something to laugh at. That's the most prestigious award you can get in journalism. And now the Washington Post has completely turned around and released an article here. It's called The Post's View, which is the Post's version of an editorial. It's just, you know, this is what we here at the Post all agree on. Here at Hot News Talk Radio, we don't really agree on everything. We disagree on a lot of things here at our radio station, and that's okay. That's the fun thing about working here is we have all sorts of different views on all sorts of different things, and that's fine. We have basic understandings. You know, we all have a basic guideline that we follow along, but for the most part, we disagree on a lot of things, and that's okay. But it seems that the Washington Post is very well unified in this. It came out with a statement here, and this is real. This is an actual article for Snowden. And that's not a statement saying, well, there's not been a pardon for Edward Snowden and there probably won't be one because there are political interests here. No, it's saying no pardon for Edward Snowden, as in he should not get one. Get a pardon, according to the Washington Post here. To say the least, because they got a Pulitzer Prize because of the story which they wrote. He's the reason they got reason probably they still exist and people still care about the Washington Post. The dinosaur, we all know that. And I think it's a little bit ironic that radio is lasting way longer than newspaper is, because radio is still something that's hugely relevant, whereas newspapers, you got to sit down, you got to read them. For sitting down and reading news, we have tablets, we have smartphones, we have laptops, we have the internet. With radio, you can't replace radio because it's a format, it's an art form. Newspaper writing can be done online, but radio, yeah, you can do podcasts, but they're not live. They're not the same as talk radio. Washington Post has achieved a ignominious, what's the word there? Anyway, they've achieved a feat, we'll say that, in U.S. media history. the first ever paper to explicitly editorialize for the criminal prosecution of its own source. This is the first time it's ever happened in history. One on whose back the paper won and eagerly accepted a Pulitzer Prize for public service. But even more staggering than this act of journalistic treachery against the paper's own source are the claims made to justify it. So how do you justify throwing your own source under the bus, a man who a lot of conservatives and liberals alike have agreed did something very good for the country, that he exposed what was going on with the NSA? We found about X-Keyscore. We found out about Stingray, not so much about Stingray from Snowden, but it was a side effect. We found out about all the different violations against the Fourth Amendment that the NSA, National Security Agency, quote unquote, was committing against the people. But for some reason, throw them under the bus. PRISM was the big one, you might remember. That was to collect more than just metadata against basically everyone who's ever used the internet without the Fourth Amendment, without using the Fourth Amendment, no warrants, no affidavits, none of that stuff. The Post editors concede that one and only one of the programs that Snowden enabled to be revealed was justifiably exposed, namely the domestic metadata program, because it was a stretch, if not an outright violation of federal surveillance law and posed risks to privacy. It used to be in the old days, and I mean back in the old days, like 1700s, being called a liberal wasn't an insult. Being called a liberal wasn't a bad thing, because liberal back then meant, you were all for liberty. You're all about people having different rights. Conservatives were the ones who were holding us back. We need to stay in this agrarian society. It's no surprise to me that the Washington Post, because they're all a bunch of Hillary shills anyway, want Snowden behind bars, but it does show that they are rats. They're snakes in the ground. Caller, you're on the air. What's up?
On the weekend where there were a few terrorist bombings in New York. And as I said with 9/11, one of the reasons it happened was because people weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. Do you ever know someone that was doing a job and they end up doing things that they're not supposed to do? Either they go beyond to help, or they don't help enough, or they're just doing something they shouldn't do. Do you ever notice that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the problem is these people in the federal government, in the military, or just in bureaucracy, believe they have the authorization, as Nixon said. Nixon once said, the president cannot break laws. He actually said that. The president cannot be a criminal. The president can't he's not bound by the law.
Yeah, he went on about how the president can't be a crook. He'd lose all the faith of the American people.
They don't recognize that they are limited by Article 1, Section 8. They're restricted by the Constitution and their oath of office. Edward Snowden showed how these people have no regard for you, me, or the American public, in that they think they can listen into all of our conversations. And they do it under the guise of, we agree to it by contract.
Right.
Because they paid off Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, and the rest of them to the tune of billions of dollars by funding their infrastructure. We know the Washington Post now is controlled by the federal government. And here's how they get you. Russell, we're not coming after you, but did you know your sister? Did you know your father? Did you know your mother did this or that? Do you know we have this information on them? And then you keep quiet. So they've got some information on someone at the Washington Post. I can tell you that.
Yeah, that seems to be the way.
What they're doing is, listen, I don't know that Snowden released any information about our nuclear sites or programs or anything else. I don't think he did. But Hillary did. Bill Clinton, her husband, sold the North Koreans enough information about the W-88 warhead back in the early 90s, and I was screaming about this on the radio, so now they have nuclear weapons. Hillary and her husband should be in prison for treason.
Not only that, there's
They're
also
the ones that have released national secrets, and she's running for president. Well, not Snowden. Snowden just revealed what kind of pigs we're dealing with who believe they can listen in on every conversation. They're listening to this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Caller, I want to ask you a question. You seem like
I can tell you there are some people within the government listening to this saying they're right, but we can't say anything because if we say something, they're going to go after me, my family. My family.
I think they're going after you now. They've sent anthrax to your house. Caller, you seem like a smart kind of guy. I want to ask you something. Have you heard about what's going on right now, in Haiti? Not necessarily what's happening in Haiti, but what's going on with the Clintons regarding Haiti.
Haiti demanding information from the Clintons you're talking about? Yeah.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah. But Haiti has to demand information. And there's evidence that's only 6% of what the Clintons take in get actually dispersed to so-called charitable organizations. Listen, you're dealing with a criminal government.
Right.
I call them occupiers. The whole lot of them in Washington, D.C. are concerned about keeping the $3 trillion. And the Republicans and Democrats for so long have had a lock, stock, and barrel hold on trillions of dollars. And the distribution of that money that Donald Trump scares them to death. I'm afraid for Trump's life. Because the internationalists, the New World Order types like George Bush, who, by the way, hated Reagan. Reagan hated him because Reagan knew what he was about.
Mm-hmm.
They know no ends or bounds. I really fear for Trump. I really do, because these people will do whatever is necessary to maintain their power, including supporting and electing their so-called opponent, which is Hillary, which, by the way, isn't their opponent. She's part of the entire system. She supports all the big bankers. She supports the New World Order. She supports the infrastructure. She supports the infrastructures of the NSA, as does Obama. Obama campaigned on the idea that he was going to abolish it. Guess what he did? He expanded it. He expanded the spying.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, he went on this
and
platform.
By the way, the NSA, listen, there were supercomputers prior to that.
Oh, yeah.
Called Echelon.
Yeah.
I have no problem with the government spying on other governments.
Sure.
Or the government spying on non-American citizens. But the second you stop my freedom of movement in my vehicle and ask me a question without probable cause, you become a fascist Nazi. And you need to be knocked on your ass and put in prison. And the second you listen to my conversations or read my email without probable cause to believe I've committed a crime and violate my due process, you are the enemy. You are the enemy of this republic. You are my enemy. You are this country's enemy. You know what patriots do?
What's that?
They defend their country against tyrannical governments and bureaucrats and politicians. That's what patriots do. Because they're not the government. The government is the structure of this republic based on the Constitution. They're a bunch of weaselly little bureaucrats trying to maintain their power under the guise of the common good, under the guise of, oh, people want security more than liberty. I had an FBI agent tell me back in the late 70s, we don't have enough courage to implement the Second Amendment because we want security over liberty. They believe that. They really believe that.
That's how they can
That's
feel
what
secure.
This election is about. This election is about unintended consequences. And as I said before, the liberals, the Marxists, the progressives better pray that Trump wins. Because they're not going to want the unintended consequences of his loss.
Yeah, it's going to be a mess. This whole election season, November the 8th, is going to be a big shakeup for the U.S. in more ways than I think the average person knows.
And let me tell you, they don't get it. They don't understand.
Yeah.
People are being taxed to death. We're tired of being taxed to death. We're tired of unborn babies being murdered. We're tired of all the agencies of government
and there's
using their power.
And there's such a feeling of hopelessness, too.
Everything that was talked in the Declaration, we're tired of people like Barack Obama, who's not a legislature, claiming that he can pass a law that some guy can claim to be a woman that day and walk into a woman's restroom.
Yeah.
Even though he doesn't have female parts. We are tired of these people saying that a man and a woman and a woman can get married. Common sense says that can't happen. And we're not going to accept it or tolerate it. And they're going to lose. They need to be very, very scared. They need to be afraid. I have never seen so much dissension in my entire life. In a way, I hope Hillary wins. You know why?
Why is that?
Because they don't deserve to have a peaceful revolution. The liberals and the Marxists and the progressives, for what they did to this country, the Democrats, don't deserve a peaceful resolution to this action. They don't deserve it.
Wow.
So in a way, I hope Trump loses.
It is sort of a two-sided thing. I noticed, too, if you look on social media, if you look at how people are acting online now, they're a lot more open about how unhappy they are with the current governmental system, how unhappy they are. And there's a lot of stuff about the Clintons, there's a lot of stuff about government systems that are getting out there to the general public thanks to social media. There's a lot of misinformation too, but social media is actually being a huge help in making people aware of what's happening. It's really amazing.
Social media is everything.
It really is.
Everything. Prior to the internet and social media, the three major networks just totally propagandized everything.
Yeah.
They were the biggest liars of false or liars of information disseminated from the two or three major news sources out of New York that sent the propaganda agenda. The internet, you know what? The genie's out of the bottle, and that's the problem, is they can't put the genie back in. If the government knew what they were creating, they probably would have stopped it. But the genie's out of the bottle, and that says the dissemination of information. They're not going to stop it. People under 50 no longer trust the national media. ABC, CBS, television news, Fox, and the rest of them that have their one source from New York to set their agenda are going to be gone in 10 years.
Yeah,
Being
I don't
laughed at
doubt it.
right now. No one under 50 trusts them. They know they're lying.
It's like how Fox says it's the number one news source, number one cable news channel. That doesn't mean much anymore because people my age, especially, we don't watch cable TV. It's mostly
They don't
people.
watch it.
Yeah, it's older people and McDonald's that has it on. That drives the ratings up.
Well, on top of that, let's face it, Fox is moderate.
Yeah.
I think they're conservative or nuts. They're moderate.
No, they're very moderate.
They're so far to the left. I mean, they don't even try to hide it anymore. MSNBC and CNN don't even try to hide it anymore. They may as well just say they're the progressive, liberal, socialist, Marxist.
They're straight up communist a lot of the time, too.
They don't even try to hide it anymore.
No. All right, Colin, we got
laughable to me is when they talk about right-wing talk show hosts have an agenda. They all have an agenda.
Everybody has an
agenda. The difference is they do it under the guise of objective news.
Right.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. He drops a bomb and then leaves. That's very American of him. Love it. So that's our caller. Number to call in is 423-800-8949, 423-800-8949. So not Trump, but Snowden. There we go. Snowden's been thrown under the bus by the Washington Post, and it's not surprising at all because there's been a big shift in the Washington Post. Now they're very open about how progressive and liberal and happy they are about all the different changes that are happening societally, and being against federal government doesn't really mesh with that feeling anymore. You know, back in the day, the 60s or so, you had hippies, progressives, but they were pretty anti-government, right? They were really anti-government. And I think the reason was they felt it was, a bunch of stuck-up white dudes in government. And now they're all for it because they realized, hey, wait a minute, this is where we get our benefits from. This is where we can get the redistribution of wealth. They're not wanting a citizens' revolution anymore. You kept hearing about that. We need to overthrow the bourgeois and all that, leftist nonsense. They're not going for that anymore. They're going for assimilation and change in the government that's already existing. That's a very dangerous thing, and it is happening right now. It's frightening, but it's true. Look at media right now. Look at what's happening in the media. Think about this. Right now, there's a story about Edward Snowden. There have been 2 bombings, well, almost 2 bombings. There was 1.5 bombings in New York. Lots of people injured. There's been a gas pipeline leak in Alabama that's causing gas prices to surge here in the South. Of course, they don't care about the South, it seems. Gas prices to surge in the South. There was an accidental, quote-unquote, bombing of Syrian government forces just over the weekend on, I believe, Saturday that happened. And the Russians called an emergency UN meeting. There was also the story about how it's just escaped me now. There was a story about how there was a massive leak with Clinton. This has actually just come out, a massive leak with Clinton where her tech advisor asked people on Reddit how to alter email headers. That's a very big deal. It's just come out a few hours ago. We're going to talk about that. It's not even hit the major news sources, so stories and sources are a little bit scattered, but we're going to try to piece it together here on Binary on Hot News Talk Radio. This is a very major story coming out now about Hillary Clinton. We're going to be live streaming on Facebook, both halves of our show here, by the way. Go to facebook.com, search for Hot News Talk Radio. You can find us there, Hot News Talk Radio on Facebook, and you can watch us streaming live. This show, first and second halves, will be taking a break. Not really a break. We'll just be taking an intermission while I set up the second stream here. We're also streaming live on YouTube. Go to YouTube and search for Hot News Talk Radio, and you can find us streaming live there as well. Something real quick that made me really annoyed. You have all this stuff going on. I just listed a whole ton of things that are happening in news media right now. So what does one particular tech news site, The Verge, talk about? Well, stories on their front page about the Emmys instead of hard news. And this is a tech website, by the way. This isn't like, an opinion article, whatever. This isn't National Enquirer. This is or USA Today or anything like that. No, this is an actual supposedly tech news source. And instead of talking about tech, they have 8 Emmy stories, 8 stories about the Emmys. I forgot the Emmys were even happening. I guess that makes me a stick in the mud. But one is this. Emmys 2016, transparent star Jeffrey Tambor demands Hollywood give transgender talent a chance. That's a headline today. Instead of talking about Syria, instead of talking about what's happening with Clinton right now, which is big news. It affects all voters ever, Democrat and Republican. It's a nonpartisan issue. It's an issue of integrity in the vote. You can vote Democrat and still care about integrity. And there's also the issue of the Syrian government. There's the issue of the gas pipeline. But we'll ignore that, and instead we'll talk about transgender in media, a non-issue. Come on, people. This is Binary here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, hotnewstalkradio.com. Even if it isn't a non-issue, it's definitely not an issue for tech news. That's an opinion article thing. That's an entertainment article thing, not tech news. Come on.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world. News Talk 1240.
MLS 2239. Listen up, y'all. Ben Phillips Home Rate Mortgage, 805-9100. I'm in the business of saving people money. And if you want to save money, pick that cell phone up right now. 805-9100. I received a call that I won't forget. A family of 5. The husband's a TVA engineer. Financial stress was rising from medical bills and children in college. We lowered their rate, paid off their bills, and saved them $800 per month. Now they're living stress-free. And the best part is this. They're skipping 2 payments and paying off their home 7 years faster. It's easy, and you can do it too. It just takes 10 minutes, 1 phone call to 805-9100. There's no cost and no obligation. So why wouldn't you call 805-9100? Or if you're at your desk like me, get a quick quote at homeratemortgage.com. That's 805-9100 or homeratemortgage.com.
Really works for weight loss, pain relief, circulation, and building bone density. Go to Lily's as seen on TV and talk to Dottie at the Gun Barrel Road store and Robert at the 153 Hickson location. 10 minutes equals 1 hour walking. It really works.
I'm blowing everything up. We're starting over. I'm doing a new show. I want guys who push it to the middle of the table and go over the top. Take a risk, fail miserably. I'm right, and I'm not wrong, and I'll never back down. Conflict works. Allow it.
It's The Herd with Colin Cowherd. Right here and everywhere. Noon Eastern.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world. News Talk 1240.
Hot 1240 Hot News Talk Radio with your Hot News Now update. Southerners feeling a smack to the wallet following a gas pipeline breakage in Alabama. Now a 20-cent increase in price just as of today, and that price could be rising over the week as a gas pipeline in Alabama is still spewing gas out of it. A major collection pond has been collecting that gasoline, but it could be spilling out here soon. Major crisis now for the East Coast with gas prices. State of emergency declared in Tennessee, and Governor Nathan Deal in Georgia is considering one as well. A pedestrian walking along DuPont Parkway was hit by a car where the speed limit is 50 miles per hour. This happened at 2:30 a.m. this morning. The victim was rushed to the hospital. In election news, Gary Van Hooser has dropped out of the County Commission District 3 race. He's now backing Joe Smith for that race in District 3. He announced this on Friday. He signed papers at the Hamilton County Election Office to have his name taken off of the ballot for the November election. If it's going on in the Tennessee Valley, it's going on Hot 1240 Hot News Talk Radio.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world. News Talk 1240.
Expect increasing clouds and more sunshine out there through the afternoon. A little breeze out of the north will help. Highs upper 80s. Tonight, clear, comfortable. Lows into the lower 60s. For Tuesday and Wednesday, more sunshine. Looking dry for a while with hot afternoons and highs near 90. McBride Realty can help. With decades of experience, they get big-time results with small-town values. Licensed for the tri-state area. Check McBrideRealty.com for their complete listings. And I'm Machine 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Ford.
On AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
Have you ever heard the name Paul Combetta? This is just now coming out, and it's all unconfirmed as of right now. I want to stress that. This is all unconfirmed speculation. There's not been any official statement from the Clinton campaign. There's not been any statement officially from Reddit. There's not been any statement official from really any source about this. This is all speculation at this point. I want to stress that. We're live right now on Facebook. Go to facebook.com. Go to our Hot News Talk Radio Facebook page. And you'll see that we're streaming live right now to you in your living room, your office, your smartphone, your laptop. You were in Starbucks. Doesn't matter. You're on the bus. You're on the subway. You're in space. I don't care. You can listen to us here on Facebook. Just go to Facebook and you can see our live stream. And the number to call in here is 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949. That's 8949. It's not a 1-800 number. That's just what the phone company gave us. Oh, well. It's Hot News Talk Radio on Twitter, Facebook, TuneIn Radio. We're on our weather app on Bloom Sky. And you can also call in again, 423-800-8949. That's the number to call in here at Hot News Talk Radio. Paul Combetta, who is the man who's accused of deleting Hillary Clinton's emails after their preservation, was ordered by Congress, who was given immunity by the Department of Justice and then refused to testify, has now been caught asking Reddit, allegedly, of course, how to alter the contents of emails which were under federal investigation back in 2014. Now, just to make things clear, Reddit is a online forum, you might call it if you're an old timer. It is an online forum. It's an online community where people post things. There's a board for Chattanooga that's pretty good. There's a board for Tennessee itself, which is pretty good. There's a board for basically everything. Reddit's great in a lot of ways, but it's not in a lot of other ways. I get my news from lots of sources. Reddit is sort of supplementary to that. It's not a major news source, but it is a place where a lot of very important people go to talk. There are a lot of journalists on there who hide their identities. I don't. I'm on there pretty obviously because I'm not popular enough for people to care who I am, and that's okay. I'm happy with that, actually. I like that I can go to bars and sit down and have a quiet drink without people running up to me and saying, hey, you're the guy on the radio. That's nice. But anyway, him asking, though, allegedly, of course, about this deletion of emails during a federal investigation is illegal as of 18 USC Article 1519. USC 1519. Look that up. And the thing here is, and this is very loosely connected, but it seems to be pretty solid too. A man posting under the username of Stone Tear, or Stone Tier, perhaps it's TEAR, Stone Tear, asked a particular subreddit called Exchange Server how to alter emails without anyone finding out, how to strip or replace the email addresses in the to from fields in all of emails. And that's a very big deal. Now, how do we know that that's Paul Combetta, who's a tech advisor to Hillary Clinton? Well, he had a website way back in the day which was referenced by another person who had a fan site, and Paul Combetta's email address at the time was stonetier or stonetear at gmail.com. And it seems a little bit unlikely that this is not the same Paul Combetta, and this is not the same Stone Tear or Stone Tier posting on Reddit. So it's not conclusive, but it seems pretty dang likely. So he says, and I'll read his post here verbatim. He says, hello all. I may be facing a very interesting situation where I need to strip out a VIP's very VIP email address from a bunch of archived email that I have both in a live exchange mailbox as well as a PST file. Basically, they don't want the VIP's email address exposed to anyone, and we want to be able to either strip out or replace the email address in the to/from fields in all of the emails we want to send out. He says, I'm not sure if something like this is possible with PowerShell or exporting all the emails to MSG and then finding and doing find/replaces with a batch processing program of some sort. Does anyone have an experience with something like this and or suggestions on how this might be accomplished? Pretty simple post if it weren't about a politician, a very VIP politician who's under the investigation from the DOJ. And this image, which is post, I will admit, /the Donald, which is it's a subreddit that's all about Donald Trump. That doesn't mean that everything they post there is untrue. It just means you have to understand that this does have that sort of lean to it. The smoking gun, they say, is that Paul Combetta used his online handle Stonetear or Stonetier, I don't know which. His email address is stonetear@gmail.com. His Etsy account is Stonetear, and this allowed someone to find his old posts on Reddit. The likelihood that someone else will be using this who also works with email is kind of low. Dealings with a very VIP person. Important person. Important person. Anyway, this was posted on r/the Donald, and it turns out that he has now been deleting his submissions very quickly. He's been desperately deleting his submissions, and has been trying to keep everyone from finding out about this. He also received immunity from the FBI, so there was no risk of him for anything he posted. And if you're watching on Facebook, by the way, I apologize for that buzzing sound you just saw. My phone got an email alert. I'm not going to delete that email. Paul Combetta has received immunity from the FBI. His interest in hiding and deleting links. He then confirmed that he was Paul Combetta. Gets worse and worse from there. Paul Gambetta was working with Hillary Clinton, running her email server, immunity from the FBI, so nothing he would say would be used against him. They guaranteed him that. But still, he decided to delete these emails, it would seem. And the user, Stone Terror, who posted that post originally, has no posts at all on his user account, which seems unlikely because he has 1,648 post karma, meaning he's posted quite a lot, actually. Now doesn't have any posts. That's contradictory. So he's deleted all of his posts. That's what's happening in international news right now. That's what's happening in national news right now on the side of what's happening with Clinton. And this is just the tip of the iceberg for what's happening with Clinton right now in terms of internet backlash. There's been a lot of news just recently about the Haitian president of the Senate. Now, that's a distinction that must be made. He's the president of the Senate, formally, not the president of the country itself. Think of it like a Speaker of the House. The president of the Senate came out saying that Bill Clinton tried to bribe him. That's a pretty big deal. So there's a lot going on with the Clinton family, the Clinton Foundation, and lots of money going around in Haiti, which seems to have been actually a massive excuse to transfer billions of dollars to family friends for them to keep and not actually use to revitalize Haiti, which is a country which desperately does need foreign aid given consensually by non-governmental organizations or entities. There we go. I'll spit that one out there. It's crazy to me what's happening in Haiti and what's happening with all that money. Where did it all go? It seems to have just sort of vanished, disappeared, gone to different contracting companies, perhaps owned by family members of the Rodhams and the Clintons. Perhaps, maybe, could be. It's all a big mess. And you might be wondering, what does that have to do with tech news? Well, it has quite a bit to do with tech news, actually, because it's something that's being covered online, but it's not being covered in national news. It's not being covered on TV. It's not being talked about in really any news outlet that I've seen ever. It's being talked about in smaller YouTube channels, which are very good, and they put out good news. But there's not really any talk of it happening on, say, Fox, which is supposed to be everyone's go-to conservative news source. You know, it's not there. It's not being talked about on Breitbart, which is good for some things and bad for others. It's not being talked about, obviously, in the Washington Post, because that would make their darling Clinton look bad. It's not being talked about on The Intercept, which is sometimes a little bit liberal. It's not being talked about in The Guardian or any other news agency. It's not even being talked about on RT, which has a vested interest in making sure Clinton does not become elected. So it's not being talked about on any news source that I've ever seen so far, except for Hot News Talk Radio. It's ridiculous to me that a small, I don't want to say small, but a up-and-coming Chattanooga news radio station is the only news source right now talking about the corruption that's happening in our very own government to any sort of depth. I'm aware of that's talking about this, to any sort of depth, to any sort of reason, to any sort of conclusion even. Because we can find from the emails, you can find from all the different things you read about her leaked emails, you can find it in her leaked emails themselves. There's obvious exchanges of money in order to obtain a position as an ambassador to any given country you want. If you donate enough money to the Clinton campaign and to the DNC, you can get an ambassador position, it seems. So why then is the news media ignoring that? A simple spreadsheet showed that was the case, but we'll just ignore that. There are massive political contributions being made by people who were then made to be ambassador, and we're going to pretend that that's just a coincidence. It's all a major coincidence. I don't think so. Something that's also happening, which is distracting a lot of this news, but it is worthy of talking about, is what's happened in New Jersey just now. There's been a shootout in New Jersey with a suspect now who's in custody after this shootout in New Jersey. He's the suspect in these bombings which have happened in New York. There were 3 devices, one of which went off. I think it was 3, it may have been 2, one of which went off. And one of these devices detonated, injuring several people. There are videos of it. It shatters windows, and people are obviously stunned, eardrums blown out, people obviously injured. A bomb nearly killed several people, but we won't call it terrorism. It doesn't matter what the race of the man was. It doesn't matter if it's a woman, if it's a gay woman or a gay man or a straight man or a straight woman or a so-called Christian or a so-called Muslim. It's terrorism nonetheless. You know, we can talk about, well, it might not be Islamic terrorism. Well, it might not be Islamic terrorism. We don't know. But it certainly is terrorism. If you set off a bomb with the intent to injure civilians, that is terrorism. It doesn't matter if it's Islamic terrorism or white nationalist terrorism or IRA terrorism. You know, the IRA has been a big source of terrorism in the UK. We had no problem calling them terrorists. But if they're Muslims, somehow we have to back off and say, well, wait a minute, Muslims can't be terrorists. You know, saying that Muslims can be terrorists is not saying that Muslims can't be peaceful. You know, it doesn't make any sense to me that singling out a Muslim person as a terrorist, you know, this individual Muslim was a terrorist. For some reason, that means that now all Muslims are terrorists. And anyone who calls this Muslim person a terrorist must believe that all Muslims ever are terrorists and there can't be any peaceful Muslims you can hang out with. And we know for a fact that that's not true. We have Muslim friends here. I have Muslim friends. You know, it's not like, and that's a silly thing to say, I know. It's like, oh, I have black friends, I can't be racist. But no, seriously, most people get along just fine with people in their neighborhood. And most people who are more than willing to point out Islamic terrorism when it happens are also not afraid to hang out with Muslims because they know most Muslims are not going to blow them up. So calling someone a terrorist or calling it Islamic terrorism is no different than calling it Irish nationalistic terrorism. That doesn't mean that all Irish people are terrorists. We know that because half of us have Irish heritage in us here in the South. You know, it's ridiculous to me, this narrative that happens where we say, well, Muslims can't be terrorists because Muslims are peaceful people. It's like, well, yeah, a lot of them are. Most of them are. That doesn't mean there's no such thing as Islamic terrorism. Ridiculous to me. You saw the whole controversy that happened in Pennsylvania where they had in Shanksburg, or Lynchburg, sorry. They had the, or was it Shanksburg? Gosh, where the plane crashed in Pennsylvania. I'm ashamed I forget the name of it now. On 9/11, where the plane crashed, they put up a monument to the victims of Islamic terrorism, and the Muslim community went in an uproar. You can't call it Muslim Islamic terrorism, but it was Islamic. By definition, it was terrorism done in the name of Allah, done in the name of Islam. How can you say then that it's not Islamic terrorism? Well, it wasn't properly done in the name of Allah or whatever. I mean, come on, people, come on. Let's not kid ourselves. Let's call it what it is, you know? Let's call things what they are. I'm sick of jumping around. You know, I'm sick of this whole mentality where we gotta be afraid of calling things what they are. You know, like criminals. We're afraid now, it seems, to say if a criminal is a young black man. That doesn't mean all young black men are criminals. Everyone knows that they're not. You know, you'd have to be the absolute worst racist ever to think that all young black people are criminals. And let's be clear, there are lots of young white criminals and young Hispanic criminals and young Arabic and every other race, religion, creed. It doesn't matter. Lots of criminals out there, man. But for some reason, you know, we're withholding on saying the race of the killer. Why? You know, I get that the race doesn't really matter and it doesn't really add much to the narrative, but it is still a talking point. It is still something that should be released. It's just a detail that comes out. And withholding it just makes people more suspicious. And it keeps happening. It's ridiculous to me. It just doesn't seem to make any sense because it's like, well, we have to keep this narrative that, you know, that somehow we have to maintain this narrative that all criminals are of a certain color or all criminals are of this color or that race. Just tell it like it is. You know, people can draw their own conclusions. They're pretty good at that. If people are racist, they're going to draw racist conclusions. If they're not, they're not. You know, that's not your problem as a news person. What conclusions people draw from it. Your job is to tell the truth. What are the facts? Because people will always draw their own conclusions if there isn't a conclusive one already. A conclusive conclusion. Isn't that funny? It's ridiculous to me. But anyway, a suspect is now in custody after the shootout in Linden, New Jersey. And he does have what appears to be an Arabic name. Is he Muslim? I don't know. You know, that's a detail that's not come out. And that's okay. You know, we'll find out in time. This man does appear to be Arabic. They say he's a naturalized Afghan. And this is just a suspect, by the way. It's not confirmed that he's the bomber. But this is a bomb which went off in Chelsea, which just incidentally is known to have a very large homosexual, community population in Chelsea in New York City. Very large explosion went off just a few days ago, I believe yesterday or last night. And multiple people were injured. I believe in the 60s, people were injured. And it's a tragedy for sure. And it does remind you sort of the nightclub bombing, where they were hesitant about talking about who the person was who shot up the nightclub. And now they seem to be hesitant to talk about what exactly the background is of this person who shot up or bombed, I should say, this city street in Chelsea. I mean, come on, people. Just tell us what happened. You know, if people are going to be terrible racists, they're going to be terrible racists, and you can't stop them. But most people are pretty dang reasonable, and trying to sugarcoat things or not is just going to make the situation worse. Lying or being deceptive always makes every situation worse. But for some reason, we like to sort of, skip over that and say, well, he told only some of the truth. It's ridiculous. Not just in explosive news, but also in tech news. Space is something that's quite interesting, actually. There's been major development. Drives, we'll say, engines in space, which do not require any sort of explosive fuel. It's an engine which is going to be tested in space here soon. An EM drive or M drive off of radio frequencies that are just nascent, they're just existent. And it's not a joke, it's a real thing. It's this real engine that they're launching into space, and it's going to be going into environments here soon, assuming the rocket doesn't explode. M drive, you can look up the M drive or EM drive. That's going to be going up in space rather soon here. That it continues to work in space as it does on Earth, generating thrust from a seemingly place. And it's called the impossible space drive, is what they're calling it. So can it survive? Will it prove that it can actually generate thrust from seemingly nowhere in space? This is a huge development for deep space travel. The M drive is going to get its feather drop after a fashion. The famous feather drop was about proving something everybody already believed. Hammer in a vacuum, and without air resistance, they will accelerate downward. Well, now, a similarly based concept is similarly based space-based test, but this time, the topic is much more controversial. Only electricity, no fuel whatsoever, will produce thrust. Confirm several centuries of physics in a moment. A confirmation of the EM drive could completely overturn just as much, just as quickly. The test is actually going to be conducted drive, a sister tech to the more famous EM drive, but since nobody can clearly articulate how the two work differently, they're largely interchangeable at this point. Become the Kleenex of the category of thruster called RF thruster, which super doesn't exist, but might soon come to. And this is all very, tech hard to understand physics stuff that I don't get. The way it seems to work is it takes in resonant radio frequencies, which there's a lot of in space, and somehow converts that into thrust, magnetic thrust. Drive is a propulsion device that's supposed to work without any fuel. The claim is that the invention uses only a modest amount of electricity, its intrinsic design, and the physical properties of the universe to produce thrust. They claim defy the laws of physics as we know them. A number of authorities have tested the EM and CAN drives, up to and including teams from NASA. They, like many before them, measured an extremely small amount of force, and try as they might, they could not figure out what was creating it unless it was the drive. Skepticism has been widespread and vitriolic, but at the end of the day, says the article, the results are what they are. Few have been willing to claim the EM drive actually works, but the team have nonetheless been able to conclusively prove that it doesn't work, or rather they've not been able to conclusively prove that it doesn't work, and in science that carries a lot of weight, this engine. So it's not just a paperweight. That's the scary thing about it. That's kind of the odd thing about this thing. It's not just a paperweight. It actually does produce thrust. We just can't really figure out how, or at least scientists can't really figure out how. Very, very big deal. They can't prove that it doesn't work. So now NASA is taking the test to space where fewer variables can mess with your results. And perhaps they realize that regardless of the outcome, indulging public curiosity in space tech will always pay dividends because it gets people very interested in space. And that's always a good thing because space really does seem to be the final frontier. Space is one area we can all look at and say, yes, we want to go there because there is reason to. There is good reason to go into space. There are resources there. There are exploratory missions which can be conducted there. We can go to space and we can see what's out there and we can explore like humans are meant to. We can explore, and it's such an exciting thing because we don't have anywhere to explore on Earth anymore except maybe Challenger Deep. Rock climbing is now something that everyone seems to do. All the hipster kids are doing it. Skydiving is an accessible thing now. You can pay just a few $100s maybe to go skydiving. There's even a skydiving place in Cleveland, Tennessee. All these different adventurous things are so easily done now that we need something that is difficult to do that humanity can work towards. And space is that final frontier. It really is. And so getting public interest in space is definitely a worthy cause. It's something that can bring us together as a population, just like the space race did back in the 60s, where no matter what your political leaning, most of us could agree that it's worth it to go into space because there's so much we can discover from it. So many new technologies were discovered because of us going to space. So many new technologies were adapted from NASA to the consumer. Think about things like styrofoam were adapted. Tennis shoes, modern tennis shoes were adapted from different space technologies, different composites, different thermal characteristic obtaining materials. It's all just very space age, but we don't really think of it as that. Lots of developments in radio frequency communication were developed because of space. Amateur radio picked up because people wanted to hear the transmissions from space. Ham radio enthusiasts were listening to Apollo 11 as they were going up, and that's just such an amazing thing. And there's a period of blackout when you go through the atmosphere. Everyone can confirm, they actually did go into space because there was that blackout, and they were listening to them as they were going into space, and the lag got bigger and bigger, and it was just an amazing thing. It really is just astounding. Space is one of the biggest endeavors humanity can engage in. And what's the reason for going that far out? A lot of it is just to boost human ego, I suppose, but a lot of it is also just to satiate that need to know. There's always that very human need to know what's out there. You can look at it, through a telescope, but we want to be out there and we want to feel it. It's like watching a movie versus doing the real thing, watching a YouTube video of someone skydiving and actually skydiving. You want to feel it. You want to do the real thing. Even if you've seen it happen a million times, you still want to do the real thing. It's a very, it's a very carnal need, I suppose. This is Binary here on Hot News Talk Radio. Thank you, everybody, for watching on Facebook and on YouTube, hotnewstalkradio.com. And you can also listen to us on Noogaradio.com. Get us on the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone. That's TuneIn Radio on your smartphone. And Colin Cowherd coming up next.
Hot News Talk 1240 AM 1240. Hot News Talk Radio with your chance to win $124